Hey folks, how's it going? So back again with another week working on our Mega Gargant here. So we have I'm going to once again be really focused in on the base. So we've got the Gargant sat here, and we've got the base. Now I did do a little bit of work on the base between last week and today. I kind of just glued some of the pieces together to really kind of frame them up, basically. So we've got this fence post that kind of just got tugged straight out of the earth. We got this one that was functionally snapped, and will lie there. Then we've got a few bits and pieces of scrap wood that are going to have fallen down, and we've got our bits of squig. You can also see the little mushroom pieces are sat there ready to be painted up, and my hope is that by the end of today's stream we can get this to a point where we're ready to start painting it. And what I'm probably going to do is just completely paint up the base next week, start to finish, hopefully, or mostly start to finish. I think it should be a pretty quick paint job, fair amount of airbrushing work, some fun with various bits and pieces. But before we do that, we need to add in our squished squig. So if you remember, we decided on the head last week, and by we I mean I, because unilateral decision making. So we've got the squig head, which actually does need a little bit of cleanup. I'm just gonna grab a scalpel blade. Clearly missed clean up on this guy between sessions. I'd meant to do it, so we're just gonna quickly do that. So what we're doing is we're using some spare head pieces that I had to hand to really sell the impression that this is a squig, and then we're going to be pretty abstract in the rest of it. We're going to be masking quite a bit of the reality of the squig form with just blood and guts, etc. Because everybody loves some blood and guts. So for that, I mixed just a little bit earlier some green stuff here, which I'm now incorporating crap into, but never mind. As you may remember, as I mentioned previous few weeks, as I've been working with green stuff, particularly on Big Boy here. You do want to work on green stuff in stages, so having the green stuff mixed a little bit ahead of time, as you can see, it's not super tacky anymore, which is going to be important for what I'm about to do with it. So that is a key piece of this. Let's just clean up top half of the head as well. Okay, so what we're going to do is make ourselves our own squig in miniature. To do this, we're going to use a ball for the body, and we're going to attach in the head. Now, this is not going to need to be perfect by any stretch, for reasons that are going to become very clear shortly. But we do want to get a few elements figured out. So I'm I'm just taking the back end of one of my sculpting tools, and I'm just going to ensure that the squig mouth is kind of there. I want this to be a bit of a ball shape. We're not going to need to be super precise with this, but we do want it to be reasonable. I've got here a old milk carton of water that I use for this kind of stuff. It's clean water that I just use if I need to top up my water pots, or if I need decal transfer water, or if I need to do sculpting like this. It's nice just to have some water to hand. Now, there is the impressionistic solution to a squig body. We are then going to create some legs. I think these legs are going to be a little bit small, honestly, but that's okay. We don't need them to be completely on point, but that should do for one. This is going to become a tail. Now, squig tails are pretty conical, they're not really cylindrical, so we're going to go with that. And then we've got this piece already kind of starting to look a little bit like a squig leg, which is nice, a little helpful. Alright, so there's our little squiggy. Let's see if we can there we go, little squiggy, not perfectly in focus, but here we go. Not, you know, completely correct. Definitely these legs are a little bit daintier than they'd normally be. They're a bit more chunky usually. Tail's a little bit squat as well. But what we are then going to do is pop Squiggy where we're expecting him to get squished. We're going to just get some water to paint onto. Had not realized the underside of the foot was hollow. That's unfortunate. So we are going to have to proxy this. I think I'm going to just use the heel of the foot to impersonate him crushing Squiggy. And I forgot to do the thing that I actually picked up the water to do, which is just to brush, paint some water onto the foot to help reduce the sticking. So I was kind of hoping that the body would pop out the far side. So I'm going to manipulate this a little bit. Nice upturned face. We're going to pull out some of this to form that squiggy tail. And then what we're going to do is stand him in properly and tidy up those bits where I am proxying a little bit here. So just re-establish the inside of that mouth a little bit. think what we'll do is we'll actually almost carve a little bit of this out. Sharpen that up a bit. Not very easy to see at the angle it's currently at, so we're going to angle this up. Got focus, so what we've got is we've got squiggo, front end squished in. What you'll find is that most of this green stuff here is going to be completely obfuscated. Oh, dang it. Completely obscured by the basing material, so that's nothing to really worry about. But we've got the head, we've got a bit of a tail. Can work on the tail piece a little bit as well. Now, let's see if we can remove the foot. We can. Minimal damage. We've got good contact up in there. We know all of this is going to be obscured by the foot itself, but this gives us better access. As you can see, I just lost the fencing, which is unfortunate, but I can fix that up. Okay, so a little bit of a smoother tail there. You can actually, that's a little better, isn't it? All right. Hopefully the camera will stop swinging in a second. Now, what I will do is I'll leave that, and I'll probably introduce a little bit of texturing to that tail at a later point. I'm going to actually carve out a little bit of green stuff from the foot just to do that with explicitly. So there we go. So what I'm using this little bit of green stuff for is to give little nodules, little texture onto the tail as it goes down. So I'm just going to pull off tiny little pieces, roll them into spheres of varying sizes. Too big. If you're wanting to do spheres really nice and precisely, the best way is to get two flat, hard surfaces, like two pieces of board or something, or ceramic tile works great for this, and just roll the green stuff between those two pieces, and apply pressure carefully so that you don't just squish it, but that'll give you a nice spherical shape, assuming you've got good rotary motion in there. So I think it should be enough. Okay, so what we're going to do now, let's these up. Put them along the surface of the tail, like so. And add in a few onto the side. Fiddly work. Okay. That's half the size of this one. I think it's a little too big at the moment. Okay, I'm just gonna merge those into place. And then we just take a flat surface and smush them into the body of the tail. Okay, so I'm just going to blast this with a hairdryer and dry it off so that the water is not still on the surface. I'm going to try and close up that seam on the head as well. Actually, still got a bit of green stuff I can apply here, so I can already feel the green stuff really firming up. It's sorry about that. I am apparently running low on battery power on this camera. I can feel the green stuff firming up already, which is going to make the working with it increasingly difficult as we progress. So kind of just the right timing as I'm nearly done with what I need. So as I mentioned, what I'm doing here is just putting in some something to hide that seam with the plastic. Let's give it a nice smooth transition. Okay, no need to overwork it, just kind of buff it out. Okay, so we've got our basing. I'm just going to blast it with a hairdryer. Alright, and we're going to get that fence back down as well. What we're actually going to do is get some super glue and a toothpick and a sheet of paper. Forgot that bit of this. Alright. Sheet of paper. Okay, so pour some super glue carefully. Try and ensure it stays where we actually want it and it doesn't go everywhere. Toothpick, and we're just going to spread this into a thin layer across the whole surface of the base. Now, I think most people would generally go with a different process for their basing. I actually quite like this because I really like the texture of the medium that I'm going to be using. So although this is a little trickier than the usual process. The usual process is to put your basing materials down on the surface and then spray them with a little or dab on a little isopropyl alcohol to kind of soak in to everything, and then spritz it with PVA glue, and the PVA glue provides the adhesion, whilst the isopropyl alcohol basically helps it flow into all of the recesses. So I think I'm going to need a little bit more super glue. This solution can be a little bit trickier to execute because you've got a limited working time with the super glue, especially if you're in a more humid climate than I am. Because I'm in California, this is not too tricky to actually work with. The drying time on super glue is a lot longer in low humidity environments than it is in high humidity environments. So your mileage with this technique will vary depending on where in the world you live. Making sure I have good access. We want to go up that green stuff there to blend it in. Now the nice thing about the other solution where you're applying the materials first is that you do have like an undo option. You can go back and forth with your positioning of the basing materials before they're fixed in place. As you're going to see with this method, given it's super glue, that really isn't an option that you have available to you. So we've got a nice good coat there on everything. We're going to close up the pod of super glue before we have an accident, because that's always a problem when it happens. Try and disengage from the cockpit toothpick that has glued itself to my hands. Okay, and then here is our secret ingredient. And as you almost certainly can't read from that, it says baking soda. And I am just going to quickly reposition our fence posts. And then a generous pour of baking soda all over the base. So the reason I use baking soda is because it's such a fine grit. Okay. I'm going to have to do the fence post again at a later time. That did not go well. Because it's a fine grit, it actually really gives a good earthy texture to the model. It's super cheap. You know, you can get really high quality aquarium sand and the like that's kind of about as fine a grit as this is, but it's a more expensive option, and I'm generally a bit cheap to go with an option like that. This is super quick. Also acts as an accelerator, so you know you don't have to wait very long to have this applied, and relatively well stuck down. So what we can do is just tap off the excess, and we've got a texture already. If we get a coarse brush, I would normally wait a little bit longer before doing this just to make sure that all the glue has properly cured. But we're on the clock, so I'm going to find myself a brush and accelerate this. Here we go. Now, one thing to say about this process is you do want to be mindful of how thick your layer of super glue is on the base. What you'll find is areas where there's a lot of super glue, you'll get these lumps because the super glue gets drawn up into the baking soda that gets poured on and kind of hardens a larger, or glues to a larger area of the baking soda, forming these little lumps. But I think in almost all situations, unless you're doing like asphalt or something like that, this gives quite a good texture for asphalt. Unless you're doing something like that, you don't really worry too much if there are some additional lumps. I'm actually going to be going one step further and adding some more lumps of my own making. So it's going to, you know, just blend in and hardly be noticed. So we clean it off, and there we go, right? And we've got some bits where there's basically nothing. It's kind of flat. We've got some super ridgy bits, everything in between. Not completely even, much more natural. So, because I have carefully done this over a sheet of paper, I can then just pour all of this excess baking soda straight back into my container, ready for the next go around. We bring this back, and the next thing I'm going to do actually is repair my fencing, because that was unfortunate. So we have two pieces like this. then we've got this lower fence post that's kind of drooping into the ground like that. So let's retrieve that trusty toothpick that I was using not so long ago. Try and stick to my fingers a little bit less this time. Now this stuff will probably cure a little bit quicker than otherwise, because it's got little particulates of the baking soda still on the wood, I imagine, which will accelerate the adhesion if I'm lucky. Or not. Okay. And then we need to this extra piece. It can be very difficult to superglue wood because it will absorb quite a lot of the superglue. You have to be pretty generous with it to get it to actually bind. But I think we'll be okay. Okay. Now the reason that I'm so hot on getting the fencing on here is just because we have to be careful that it remains clear of the gargant itself. So if you do get little bits of glue that overlap the edging, that's not a problem. You can just sand it off a little bit later on. Okay. Fortunately, because I was positioning the fencing before I actually, as I was putting the baking soda on, I can see the points where the fencing is, and you can still faintly see the lines that I'd put to mark out everything else. So that seems reasonably secure at this point. So thick super glue really helps here when you're doing a shorter contact space. This is not as thick as the super glue I prefer to use, but oh, this is not a raging success, I have to admit. I have spray accelerant, but unfortunately I don't have a third hand with which to apply it. So feeding little bits of super glue into those joints to hold them. And I'll just again, the advantage of the super glue soaking into the wood is that you can be pretty generous in the application and remain fairly confident that you're not actually going to see it in the end goal. So and if it's still visible after we've done the painting, there are some weathering techniques we can use to hide it. So okay, I'm going to set that down. Try not to disturb it, let it cure. Reasonably good time, I think, to just get our visual references again. So we've got that fence post that's fallen down there. We've got this one that's snapped off here. Got this slat that just flung off. We've got some broken pieces lying around. And then, of course, we have our Gargant, who has apparently still got a little bit of green stuff tacked to him. And there we go, that is the basing. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so that we can see the full effect taking shape. We are not quite there, however, because this is still a little bit flat and boring. So to help with that, we're going to add a few little spots of extra texture. So in here I have my kind of gravel selection. I've got some fine gravel, I've got some coarser grit, and some kind of in-between grit. So we're going to scatter this around in parts. Now remember, when you're scattering like this, it's going to be inclined to fall away from other areas, right? So we want, but we don't want that. What we want is for it to actually kind of collect in other areas, in the less accessible areas, right, like around the fence post, etc. So we are going to rescape this a little bit as we progress. We kind of want it somewhat in a line, right, because the stones are going to get kicked around a lot more in the open than along the fence line, so they're naturally going to accumulate along the fence line where they're not going to get disturbed, but they can still travel from other areas. So this is our starting point. And we're just going to take a brush and kind of landscape them up. A little bit. Mostly around the fence posts, but also a little bit in between the fence posts, I suspect. So I think that looks pretty good. Now, having done that, what we're going to do is we're actually going to remove the wood. You've got to remember in the story the wood's only just been knocked over by Hradoth, so we want that to be the very last thing that gets stuck down. The fallen wood, I should say, the fallen fencing. The upright fencing is put in place so that it sits in the scenery. Speaking of sitting in the scenery, we want a little bit more accumulated around this fence post here. So, we've got that all nicely positioned. We're going to set our extra fencing aside out of the way. Do a quick little bit of tidy up here. Apparently I'm super gluing stuff to my fingers again. Okay, so if you keep a real rock on hand, you can actually make green stuff rocks really easily by basically just kind of pressing the green stuff into the texture of the rock at various angles. And then positioning it somewhere. Where do we want this? Too well attached to the knife edge. I've lost a lot of that texture, but okay, so next thing we're going to do is just drop in a little isopropyl alcohol, and the intention of this is to just give us a little bit of a wet surface for the to stop things blowing around as we spray over the PVA. So isopropyl alcohol has a low surface tension, and so it will do a really good job of flowing into all of the recesses and areas without disturbing stuff, without kind of beading up or anything like that, which is exactly what we would like it to do. So I've got a little paintbrush cap, which I'm using as a impromptu pipette. Just making sure we kind of wet the area pretty well. That should do it. And then we need to spray on our PVA, which I have not prepared. So hold on for a second. I lie, I have prepared it. Alright, so what we have here is just a PVA water mix. We're going to get collateral damage out of the way before we start. So a good amount of that sprayed on. And we've just got to let that dry now. But fundamentally, that is the vast majority of the basing now complete. It looks a complete mess right now because it's sopping wet, but give it a few hours and it will be pretty much ready to go. And then next week we can take it through the painting process, add the finishing touches, and I think we will have a fully finished base and be ready to get back to Hradoth and Yagle and paint them up as well. So that is it. Thank you as always for joining, folks. It is always fun doing these things. This is a project I've really enjoyed working on. I think I may even try and take this up to a competition piece, which I've not done in a while. Give it a really something that you know, really has a little bit more pizzazz to it than the kind of batch work I've been doing a lot of recently. So yeah, thank you guys for joining as ever. Please do like, subscribe, comment, all of those things. And, you know, if you can share, please do. If you feel like supporting one of my affiliates, Eric Games and Hobbies, as well as Elric's Hobbies, the details of both of those are in the description below. So please consider doing that. It gets you discounts, it helps me out, it helps the affiliates out, and they are both really great companies that I was using and buying from before I ever became their affiliate. I do actually honestly really like those companies, so please do consider that. Thanks for watching, folks, and I will see you again soon. Later days.